Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Arvada City Council workshop for July 23rd, 2018. Start off with City Clerk Kristen Rush, call the roll.
Mayor Williams, Mayor Pro Tem Marriott.
Here.
Councilmember Pfeiffer.
Here.
Councilmember Ford.
Here.
Councilmember Jones.
Here.
Councilmember McGough.
Here.
Councilmember Miller.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mayor Williams from tonight's workshop.
Okay. Hang on. Okay. All votes have been cast. There are 6 yeses and 0 noes, and so Mayor Williams is excused. It looks like we have a Boy Scout in the audience. Would you like to come on up and tell us your name and let us know what badge you're working on? Come right on down to the podium here.
I'm Bailey, and I am working on communications merit badge.
And what troop are you with?
Troop 21.
Troop 21. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming tonight. Okay, tonight we have a couple of workshops. First one is a strategy to address sidewalk and trail gaps. Mr. Devon?
Yes. Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, we have Jess String, bike ped coordinator, Sarah Washburn, one of our parks urban design managers in the Parks Golf and Hospitality Department. They've put together a great presentation that I know you'll enjoy listening to.
Hey, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jessica Stragey. I'm the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator for Arvada. I'm in the traffic engineering department, but I focus a lot more on these kind of active transportation modes. And of course, this is Sarah from the Parks Department. So way back in January, Council asked staff to not only identify sidewalk and trail gaps, but really start prioritizing them. And really they asked Parks and Engineering to get together and work together to address all of the needs of our citizens, and not just the recreational or just the transportation needs. So this is the fruits of that effort. And so first off, we took a look at all of the missing sidewalks throughout the city. So this is a map that was generated about 10 years ago by Arvada's Active Transportation Committee. Essentially, they went through, divided up the city, and walked each of those sections and identified where there were sidewalk gaps and where there should be sidewalk. And so we aggregated that data and created these maps. And as you can see, the peach-colored areas are locations within 1/2 mile of an elementary or middle school. And so, like I said, that was kind of a while ago. So since then, things have changed a little bit. A lot of the gaps have actually been starting to get filled in. So some of the smaller gaps have been filled in through maintenance programs and projects. There's obviously been a lot of development going on throughout the city, and so whenever development comes in, they'll provide street infrastructure, including sidewalks. So that's helped to fill in a lot of these gaps. And for a lot of the bigger projects, staff has been able to find grants. Unfortunately for us, that means that we get all of the hard work to do. So a lot of the remaining projects have constraints on them, like right-of-way that needs to be acquired, railroad or ditch crossings, utility relocation, a lot of these really constructability constraints. So we really want to make sure that we're prioritizing these projects effectively, because they're the more difficult projects. We want to make sure that we're really putting our resources where they need to go.
So the trail gaps backstory is began with comprehensive plan vision that envisioned regional trail corridors along protected watersheds, our canal corridors, et cetera. And that was carried through on all of our comprehensive plans over many decades. The 2000 Parks, Trails, and Open Space Master Plan outlined handful of trails projects that, similar to sidewalk gaps, were those more difficult projects that needed to be done. The 2008 Citizens CIP report took that even further and prioritized trail gaps, prepared a report to staff and council that then informed the 2013-2014 City Council Strategic Plan, which included a strategic goal of completion of all trail gaps by 2019. That effort was succeeded by a staff effort of actually going through and quantifying every single trail gap in order to get us to that 2019 goal. It ended up being about $60 million worth of trail gaps that included the actual gaps themselves as well as betterments. So those trail enhancements that might be widening, might be parallel trail, as well as trailheads or trail hubs is what we're calling them. That assessment, 2015-2016, was vetted by the Park Advisory Committee. We brought it back to council and ultimately was adopted in the 2016 Parks, Trails, and Open Space Master Plan.
So once we had our list of potential projects, our next job was prioritizing them. So staff were able to use it's called the Active Trans Priority Tool. And this was a program, essentially just a giant spreadsheet that was developed by the Tool Design Group. And it was actually published in the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center, which is a federally funded and kind of nationally recognized resource for active transportation information and data. And since then, the APT has been used all around the nation in places like Phoenix and Miami, as well as Arvada. It was actually used in the Bicycle Master Plan to help prioritize their proposed projects. So essentially how the APT works is you start off by selecting a bunch of factors. These are kind of major overarching values for the city. So things like pedestrian demand or safety or connectivity. And then once you have all of those factors, you go through and establish weights for those factors. So maybe we value both demand and safety, but we probably care about safety a little bit more. So then you go through each of those factors and select different variables within them. So how can we measure demand? Well, some of the variables we selected were proximity to schools, proximity to bus stops and transit stations. And then once we had all of those variables, we went through, collected all the data, gathered it, and applied it to each of the projects, and then scaled it based on all of the other data from each of the other projects, weighted it based on our weights, and then essentially spit out a huge ranked list of all of the projects. And then from there, we used an iterative process to kind of select the top few projects, look at them more in depth, add some more data, and go through the process again. So these were the categories that we chose. These were actually all recommended by the APT, and staff went through each of these and kind of weighted them based on how we felt that the city of Arvada would value each of these. This is what the APT actually looks like. Like I said, giant spreadsheet. So we actually had over 100 different projects throughout the city that we collected data on. And we started off with a lot of basic, really quantitative data, including proximity to schools, transit stations, as well as things like nearby traffic speeds and volumes. And then so from that list of 100 projects, we developed a shorter list of 30 projects, a little bit more manageable. And as you can see, they're really kind of spread throughout the city, but a lot of them are focused on those half-mile school areas, because that was one of our major factors and one of our most important variables.
And the trail segments project used the same APT tool. So taking that extensive list developed in 2015 and adding data to it, so the school proximity, the alternate route availability, and safety were some primary factors that narrowed down trails into this list of 30, largely focused on unincorporated areas and some of the major connections out west along State Highway 72 and 93.
And so once we had that smaller, manageable list that wasn't in the triple digits, we were able to look at a lot of the more kind of in-depth information, a little bit more qualitative rather than quantitative. One of the things that we took a look at was availability of alternate routes. So maybe a project where the nearest alternate route is only a block over is not quite as critical as one where the nearest alternate route is really long or circuitous or even dangerous. And this is also where a lot of the collaboration between parks and engineering came in. We really took a look at the connections between trails and those missing sidewalk projects, as well as the north-south connectivity aspect, which is a major factor that our Parks Department has been looking into. And from that, we entered in all of that data, kind of shuffled things around a little bit, but we were able to narrow things down even further to our list of top 10 projects. And as you can see, they're kind of mostly focused in the southeast, kind of central part of the city. And this is primarily where you get a lot of that older infrastructure, a lot of missing sidewalks in general, so not too many available alternative routes.
And again, for trail projects, we dropped out from the top 30, dropped down to top 10 by eliminating those projects where right-of-way or acquisitions or the land just wasn't ready, but could be in the future, and narrowed it down to 10 projects as well as one trail hub that corresponded to the likely project nearby.
And so once we only had 10 projects, we looked at things even more in depth, and we really focused on constructability. So we went through each project individually and looked at things like, do utilities need to be relocated? Does right-of-way need to be required? Do we need to deal with a railroad? Is the project in a floodplain? And we ranked each of the top 10 projects based on this constructability, and we were able to develop a list of final top 5 projects. And when we looked at constructability, we also kind of weeded things out based on feasibility as well. So some of the potential projects were located in places where there was a lot of development going on. So we don't want to spend all of our sidewalk money on a place where a developer might come in and construct the sidewalk for us. So these were our top 5 recommended projects, and these are really where we want to be focusing our funding in the next couple of years.
And similar to the sidewalks, for the trails, we took the 10 and dropped out those projects that were betterments, so where the lack of alternate routes was really important. We felt that the trail would provide a very high return on investment, and came up with the top 5 trail projects plus one hub project.
And so going forward, although Trails fortunately already has a lot of cost estimates for their projects, engineering is still working on cost estimates for missing sidewalks projects. So really just evaluating a little bit more detailed information about what exactly the materials cost, the right-of-way is going to cost, and really how far our funding can go. And so in the next couple of years, we're going to be focusing a lot of our funding on these top priority projects. And one of the nice things is that we already have all of this data collected and input. So going forward in the future, we can update it, we can add more gaps, we can get rid of gaps, as well as even add new sets of data that we want to kind of take a look at and incorporate. And so we'll continue to work together for future budget cycles and make sure that we're collaborating so that we can best allocate our resources. Thank you. And are there any questions?
Okay. Mr. Pfeiffer?
So there's opportunity costs. So when, I didn't hear you quite say it, but maybe you did. When there's a road reconstruction or an opportunity, are you seizing that as an opportunity to close gaps? Like the picture of the, I think you had a telephone pole right in the middle of a small little area. And yeah, it was right at the end there. It's at the end.
Oh, is that the end?
Yeah, it was the
Oh,
second from
sorry.
the end. I mean, are you seizing that opportunity if you're going to reconstruct the road or the gutters or anything like that? Is that an opportunity to do that where it might not be the top 5, it might be number 8 or 20?
Yeah, so we're definitely, part of the reason that we had narrowed it down to these top 5 projects is because there weren't really any other things kind of wrong with the road, like any other opportunities to develop. So for instance, one of the potential projects was on 72nd by the railroad crossing by Oak Street. So we didn't want to include that on our top 5 list because it's really part of a larger project. So when that larger project comes in, then they're going to be constructing the sidewalk. So we wanted to focus our sidewalk funds on specifically sidewalk projects.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you. So do we know within a half mile are kids, do they have to walk to school or does a bus take them within a half mile of school? My ultimate question is where students have to walk to school, do we have sidewalk coverage?
So they don't have to walk to school, but it's definitely a lot more likely that they will, especially because we really only looked at elementary and middle schools, so their kind of walking distance is a lot shorter. And so as you can see, we definitely still have gaps within those regions.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, I know the 60 million for all of the sidewalks that we need. Do you happen to know, and it's okay if you don't, what that cost is to get the sidewalks within a half mile, with the exception of the infrastructure issues where you have to acquire land or go through a railroad or something like that? Do you happen to know?
I'll take a shot at that.
Thank you.
Sure. So the $60 million figure that's up there was for trails, and that's through the Parks Department. But we know from our experience with the sidewalks we've built and all the costs we've got in over the years, that it costs about $1 million to build a mile of sidewalk. Believe it or not, I mean, as Jess mentioned, we're down to the locations where they weren't built for some reason. There's right-of-way issues, there may be utility issues, any number of things, maybe slope issues. So now we're getting into this pieces of sidewalk that are the most expensive to build. So we've been, as a rough cost estimate, saying $1 million a mile.
Other questions from council? Mr. McGough?
Yes, it's somewhat a specific question, but I'm just wondering, first of all, I'm really glad to see the sidewalk proposed between along Oberon Road from Carr all the way really up to 72nd and Kipling. Right now, there's just a little separation with a bumper curb or something between the vehicle traffic and the area for walking or for bicycles. As you're looking at the sidewalk, will that be further separated from will the walking area, will the sidewalk be further separated from the lanes of traffic?
Yeah, so essentially at this point with these top 5, we're looking at each project individually and kind of assessing the needs based on the feasibility of that. So Oberon Road is considered a collector, so it technically requires a detached sidewalk, but due to some of the constraints, we'll probably end up doing an attached sidewalk, and depending on the cost, turning that separated currently walking area into a bike lane. But that's all kind of up in the air right now, and as we do cost estimates and kind of figure out how much would it cost for an attached sidewalk versus a detached sidewalk, we'll really kind of
Yeah.
nail down those exact design features.
Okay, but I'm just really glad to see that's, that carries so much traffic and has the potential
Yeah.
of doing so much more, so,
Yes.
thank you.
Any other questions from council?
Looks
So
great.
I have a question, probably directed to Mr. Rusink, if you don't mind. So we're talking about sidewalk gaps, we're also talking about trail gaps. And I know the city gets some funding from Jeffco Open Space annually. Is that likely a source of funding that can go towards these sidewalk gaps, or is that committed already to other things, or what does it look like for making progress on some of these?
Well, presently, 100% of our Jefferson County city attributable share is being used to fund park maintenance activities. One thing that Jeffco Open Space will be doing in the next couple of years is doing the very same thing that you all are doing in terms of making a decision to reauthorize a $90 million bond that voters approved in 1999. So the thought that we had would be to participate in that process, have our priorities already in place. So if it looks like there's a bond reauthorization vote for the open space bonds, we would be at the table with our priorities already set.
Okay, so some possibility there. And then are there also granting opportunities, whether it's through the State Trails Program or GOCO, or I don't know, does Jefferson County Open Space have a grant program in addition to their city share?
They do, and we've been very active in Jeffco Open Spaces. Through Jess's efforts and others, we did recently get an Adams County Open Space grant to pay for the sidewalk along Tennyson Street. So we're ever mindful and watchful over any grant opportunities. Been fairly successful, but we won't stop looking.
Right. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it. Okay, so next up, we have an additional discussion regarding 72nd Avenue from Oak to Sims. Mr. Devon.
Yes, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, members of Council, Mr. Archer will be presenting this information. He's getting his presentation up. As you may recall, during the July 9th workshop, the council favorably reviewed the project to widen West 72nd Avenue. In fact, you liked it so much, you asked us to keep going west from Oak to Sims. And that required an additional approximately $11.3 million, which we were asked to find the funding for the additional debt, to assume the additional debt. Mr. Archer has put together, with the help of his colleagues in the finance department, a presentation explaining how we would do that, how we would propose to do that, and the trade-offs associated with doing so. So with that, Brian, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Devon. Mayor Pro Tem, Council, we appreciate the ability to continue our conversation from earlier this year. So I apologize in advance. Normally my presentations only have a lot of numbers. Now this one has really a lot of numbers. So it might take some time to go through it. I know Councilmember Miller will really be excited, but we'll start diving in. What we've heard loud and clear is that Council would like us to find the ability to fund 72nd Avenue from Kipling Street all the way to Sims Street. The estimate for that is approximately $64.5 million. We also agreed, Council agreed, that we would like to fund Ralston Road, which currently sits at an estimated cost of about $16.6 million. The city has identified already $1.3 million towards this number, so we would need to bond approximately $15.3 million. What you will notice is we are taking off the table the conversation around George J. Myers Pool replacement. There's currently an IGA being discussed with Jeffco Schools and Apex. Our share of that is approximately $17.5 million. We will talk a little bit about how we propose to fund that, but that would not be a part of any bond proposal for this fall from the city's perspective. A little bit of a recap. Originally, what we had brought to council was a proposal to put out an annual debt service of approximately $4.7 million, which would have generated $69 million in principal. What we are hearing from council is we'd like to push that to a $5.5 million debt annual payment, generating approximately $80 million with an overall payback of about $110 million. That is a 20-year bond, an all-in total cost of 3.348%. What you see right now is what is in our current CIP fund. These are dollars that are related only to our code section 98101, or again, the 60% of the first cent that is required to be spent on debt or capital. Or another way to look at that is 20% of the sales tax that we bring in annually. Right now in our budget, that averages about 10 million per year, growing up to almost approximately 11 million in 2023. What you see as you move down each one of these columns is where we are spending these monies, or where it's currently proposed in our 10-year plan. So you have the debt payment at about 4.7 million, public art at 50,000, transportation-related projects at approximately 1.8, fiber at 200,000 per year, various parks-related projects, and you can see those amounts change per year. Some of these are related to replacement of playgrounds, some related to irrigation, and then a line item that I'm going to call specific projects. Now, what is in this specific projects are projects that are either already identified or monies that we wanted to go to specific areas. You just heard a presentation around sidewalks and trail gaps. That would be included in that line item. If we dive a little bit deeper.
Hang on, Mr. Archer. Mr. Pfeiffer has a question for you.
Yeah, let's go back to that.
Okay. We're there.
Are we on it? No.
Yep.
Okay. So you've already assumed a certain debt payment as of 19, 20, and 21 of 4.75 million.
This is what's in the plan right now.
That's what's in the plan.
Correct.
So did you run any numbers in the future slides with a higher debt?
We did.
And then rob Peter to pay Paul, because we talked about that too. Is that that came out of the discussion last time we talked about this slide?
Yes, that is what we're going to go through tonight.
Okay, sorry. I'll wait then.
So if we dive a little bit deeper into that previous slide, this shows a little bit more in depth the items that I would say, that staff would say, are available to add to the debt payment. So you see we have approximately $1.2 million per year going to traffic signals. If you remember the previous line item, specific projects, that is made up of dollars identified for arterials, dollars identified for sidewalks and trail gaps, some money identified for the capital costs related to a possible circulator program, some money identified out in the future for irrigation replacement for our park system, some money identified out in the future for playground renovation, and approximately $300,000 in 2019 that was unallocated. These are the line items that staff feels that we could, in your terms, Councilmember Pfeiffer, rob Peter to pay Paul. So, what staff would propose that we do, if council remembers from our last presentation, we proposed on eliminating the vendor fee. That would generate about $550,000 per year. Keep the debt payment the same. Those two line items together would get us close to the amount that we're trying to generate, but we're still not quite there yet. We would reduce the money put to traffic signals each year by $350,000. That would be roughly one traffic signal per year. So today, we sit with roughly 4 or 5 that get replaced each year. This would lower that number to 3 or 4.
And Mr. Archer, just to be clear, that's replacement of existing traffic signals. It's not installation of new traffic signals
It's
where they're
both.
warranted, or is it
It's
both?
both.
It is both.
It's both.
Okay.
Predominantly today, it is replacement of existing, but it also allows for new where there's warrants for that.
Okay.
We would propose reducing the amount of money that is put in what we call the arterial bucket. Again, these are dollars that are set aside for projects that have not been identified but come up as an opportunity. So example, that could be somewhere along the way where there's some construction being done and we want to expand a project. We want to expand the street. We want to improve the street. We would propose reducing some of the money that's being put towards sidewalks and trail gaps. And I realize the irony of them just presenting, so I apologize. We would propose eliminating the capital cost for the circulator out of 2019, putting that back into our, what we would call, one-time bucket. So City Council will notice that if you accept this, that the circulator will show up on our one-time list moving forward. If we have money in the future, we would put money towards that. If we do not, it would continue to sit on that list. This would not eliminate the money that's already been identified for the circulator study. And if you remember, the agreement to that is we want the train to have been running for a minimum of 6 months, preferably a year, before we do that study. But those funds are still protected. We're not taking those away. And then starting in the future, we would reduce the irrigation by $250,000 per year and the playground renovation by $500,000, and then use the unallocated capital funds in 2019. That, by doing this proposal, would get us two things. It would get us the approximately $5.5 million for the bond and approximately $1.5 million to be put towards the aquatic center. What you see here is what those areas would look like after making that change. So, if we come up here, this is where we are now. If we take staff's proposal, if City Council will take staff's proposal, this is what you would end up with after the fact on a detailed basis. We'll look at the summary on the next slide. This will be on the detailed basis. So we would have the money combined with the vendor fee and additional funds to get the $5.5 million in debt. Our traffic signals would go down to approximately $900,000 per year. For arterials, we would have money to add to that program in 2021 and in 2023. And unfortunately, I can't make 10 years fit on this, but there's additional money in 2024. The sidewalk and trail gaps would still have funding. It would alternate, so you would get about $950 in 19, only $150 in 2020, and then it would jump back up again in 21, 22, and 23. Irrigation would go from its $1 million per year to $750,000 per year. Playgrounds from 1.5 to 1, and then we would have the reserve for the aquatics center. The question should be, where does the additional funding go? If we were to take a look at this on a summary basis, the additional funding goes to our Taking Lasting Care program. Again, this goes to long life markers, uninterrupted power supply, funding for parks, replacement on a lower level for the replacement of the playgrounds, those types of items. But you will notice that the ability to do specific projects, these would be other projects in our capital list, would be significantly reduced. We're looking at approximately $1 million to $1.3 million per year available. I wanted to put this in context to what the last Citizen CIP committee had recommended. Hopefully this looks somewhat familiar to City Council. This is what their study had recommended, projects 1 through 19. And then what you see on, that's in column 1 and column 2, you'll see whether City Council accepted that recommendation or not. If they accepted it, how much money we were to put towards it through our 10-year plan, what year that happened, and what the notes were. I'm apologizing in advance, it's very small, but that's the only way we could get it on one page. What I did do is go ahead and go through this document and try to update it. Green meaning items that would now be approved and in the plan. Yellow being items that are either put on hold or would be taken out of the plan. And if there's no color change, either brown or white, that means there would be no change to those projects. They would stay where they are. So what council will notice is that the Ralston Road corridor would be funded, again, assuming a debt issue, assuming a successful bond issue this fall and a successful vote this fall. The missing sidewalks would go from a funding of approximately, and I better get my sheet out because I can't read that far away, approximately 8.3 million down to 5.1 million. How does that relate to their top 5 priorities? I cannot answer that question. I think they still need to work through that detail. Again, we would take the circulator cost. We funded the study at $80,000. That will stay, and we will put the $740,000 back onto the top of our one-time list. Utility undergrounding will not change. Parks ADA will still be funded. It will go from a $2.6 million funding down to a $1.9 million funding. We have removed the Parks Maintenance Building from the bond proposal and are going to present to City Council a way to fund that internally. We've taken the scope of that and reduced it significantly and are looking at a completely different building. We feel very confident that we can do that for $8.7 million and fund that internally. 72nd in Indiana, we went out, issued a COP, and that project is well underway. No changes to the next 2. 64th and Eldridge is currently on hold. If we have additional one-time funding, this will get funded in the future. You will notice that the original Citizen CIP Committee recommendation was to fund the grade separation study. Council was not going to fund anything that they could not pay for. Since we feel like we've presented an option, we've made this green, obviously. No change to guardrail funding. The largest change to this is the Sims Street, which originally was funded at 16 million or 13 million. We've now taken that funding to 0 and has been removed in favor of 72nd Avenue. No changes again to the next 3. And then finally, Central Stores relocation will go along with the parks maintenance redo. So there is a bay in that proposal, and we will take that funding and should be able to accomplish that.
Okay. Questions from council? Mr. Pfeiffer.
Well, for clarity for our audience, let's go back to your numbers again.
This one?
No, further back. The one where you show the vendor fee, that's actually a positive number, and the rest are, so debits and credits are not clearly shown on here, and I think that could be misleading.
Thank you for that clarification. That is 100%
Because
correct.
that is a hard thing to read if you don't know the inside baseball, because there's definitely positives and negatives all mixed in there. So
yes,
we might want to fix that so when we put it on the website, people can understand, or
yes.
Maybe reverse.
Yeah, the vendor fee would be a different funding source than the rest of the items. That is
Yeah,
true.
it should be black and then the other red or something. And then the question I have around, go to the previous one. Why did we pick 7 million? We're trying to get to 7 million. Help me with that. I didn't catch that.
So the combination of the 5.5 million annual bond payment and the 1.5 million reserve for the aquatics complex.
Oh, but that's 8 point something million. So your previous screen said you were trying to hit a goal. Go back 2 screens. Okay, right there. You have a goal of 7 million. So the goal was to bring that down, and then you would get to 8.2. So really, your goal is 8.2.
No, so the 8.2 is available resources that are part of our 98-101 funding. Actually, all in 98-101 funding is 10 million.
Right.
Okay. So the 8.2 are items that we feel like we could make adjustments with. The difference between that two, about 1.8 million, we don't feel comfortable changing that. We wouldn't feel comfortable recommending reducing traffic all the way or reducing the ongoing replacement of long life markers, reducing any kind of replacement of parks, their ongoing replacement of the playgrounds or the play structures.
But you did because you need to get to 7 million, right? So go to the next page. Yeah, that one.
So these recommendations here are how we would get to 7 million.
Okay.
Some of that is reducing items like the traffic signal or like the sidewalks and trail gaps funding.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm being dense. I'll let somebody else talk, but I'm not following it because so you did the 7 million, you did the 8 million. I'm looking to my peers. Am I the one? Am I? Okay. Maybe I'll shut up and listen for a minute. Because I think what gets me is probably the debits and credits and the balance and where we're at, and then now we're trying to deduct, we're trying to add, and boom, we have a goal of 7 million, but we really need 8.2 million, but it's really 10.9 million.
Go.
Mr. Jones?
Go ahead. Help me.
Sorry.
Help
Here
me.
I go into convincing mode again.
And you're very successful at that.
Can you go, I think, 1 or 2 slides?
Which direction?
I'm sorry, forward. Right there.
Okay.
So I think getting to that closer to that $8.8 million number, this is kind of the funding options for the rest of the stuff to take to take it up, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I think
So
I get this
everything's
one.
this is showing the reduction of traffic signals, the reduction in sidewalk gaps. This is kind of the new balance sheet, as it were. With the debt repayment, and to your point, I think it's a valid point, the 550 on the vendor fee, that's additional money. But so I think the reality is that the goal, I don't think, was 8.8. It was just, we needed to get to 7 million. There's a delta, and so what can we put the rest of that money to help fill in some of these other gaps where we may have taken money from, correct?
Correct.
So I think.
So we brought it all the way down to build it back up to figure out where
Right, so we
needed
brought it back down,
Right.
we brought it down to, here's baseline, here's what we have to
Right,
have
the
to
7
cover our
million.
debt services just for the road projects and Myers Pool, knowing that those two are two completely different funding sources, but then there's extra, so where can we layer that back in traffic signals and sidewalk gaps and so on and
Yeah.
so forth?
Okay.
Did I explain
So you
that correct? That's
backfilled.
how I was
That was very
tracking.
good.
Okay.
Okay, so you got it all the way, and you backfilled it. Okay, thank you. You did convince me on that one. I didn't follow that. You did a better job than you, Brian.
Uh-oh.
Better watch out.
That is not true. I did not do a better job than Mr.
He taught a
Archer.
monkey. Can you go to the next page? And then so got up to 10 million is based on the taking lasting care.
That's adding in the remainder of what would be there, yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, David.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones.
Okay, other questions? Comments by anybody on council? So let me make a comment. Thank you, Mr. Archer, for looking at this in the plan. I think within any of these financing or financial scenarios, there are choices made, sacrifices made, and I think we make choices based on showing our priorities. And I think the plan that you've come up with, I think is a good plan and reflects my priorities. I'm happy to see it this way. I think provided the citizens are with us with authorizing debt or authorizing the borrowing, it does allow us to complete several really big projects, but not necessarily to the sacrifice of the normal stuff the city would do with its capital funds. There's maybe a bit of a slowdown on several pieces of capital expenditures, but nothing is taken away. And I think the most telling slide there is the one where you compare the Citizens Capital Improvement Committee's list versus where we're at here. And obviously, this was done, several years ago in a different time frame. But I think it shows that you guys are doing a really good job of addressing as much of this as we can, while doing a couple of very high value projects, which is what I look at 72nd Avenue and the grade separation that I compliment the staff and you guys on looking at things differently, like the park maintenance building and the city stores, things like that, and being able to accomplish those in a different way than just through the capital improvement plan. So for me, my comment to you would be, good job, I like what I see. I think this reflects my priorities, knowing that these capital expenditures always are kind of a reflection of priorities, and I feel very comfortable pursuing this financial scenario, and I think it's a responsible scenario that allows us to borrow money with a reasonable repayment and still continue to do all the things that the citizens value about Arvada. So that's my comments to you. If anybody else has any comments, let me know and we can pass them on. Mr. McGough.
I would just say, almost echoing what you've said there, Mr. Marriott, the staff proposal that we have here just makes lots of sense. We've got the two big projects with Ralston Road and 72nd Avenue, and we make some adjustments in the other funds, and we're still allowing, we've still got a couple other big projects that we want to get accomplished, and that's the maintenance building and to contribute to the Myers Pool, and I think all of those things are taken into account very well, and commend you on a fine presentation, and the staff proposal for funding options looks good to me.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
Yeah, I'll just be quick. Thank you. I think this gives us a lot more detail so that when we're presented with the opportunity to make a decision, we can make a better decision as it relates to whether or not we go to the voters for the reauthorization of the debt. So I think that you've done a fabulous job of identifying how we can pay for that, and I do not want to do your job. Thank you.
Mr. Pfeiffer.
Taking the
I don't want to
longest,
do yours either.
taking the longest trail to get to this part here is to understand, make sure I understood it clearly. I wanted to thank you for that patience while I made sure I understood exactly what you're trying to propose. And I agree. I think it's good fiscal responsibility to use today's dollars, because these projects are just going to get more and more expensive as we prolong them. They don't go away. They just get worse for us and our citizens. So I appreciate this plan, and I'm excited to see the fact that the park maintenance building, is discussed in here, as well as some of the other items that, we've been needing to have a good, healthy work environment for our employees, and you're addressing that within here. And the only question I had left, and then I'll leave you alone, is on the 72nd in Indiana. Was there grant money mixed into there, like federal grant money? No? Okay.
No, that's all the COPs. Certificates of participation.
So COP, no federal grant was involved? Okay. Yeah. That could be my confusion on why it's shorter. Dr. Cog showed it as $5.5 million, and it was federal funded. So
72nd Indiana?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So maybe
We'll take the money.
But it would have.
Well, that's what I was wondering. I'm like, well, holy cow, we can save more and do something different.
And we will, one of the things that our staff is committed is that if we see grant opportunities, even with these projects funded with a successful debt authorization election or some other means, we'll go for those grants and utilize that to augment the funding, or maybe pay part of the bonds off earlier, or something along those lines to make it all work.
Yeah.
Well, I think just to add to that, I think if Mr. Pfeiffer has any updates for any money that's available at CDOT, we would absolutely take monies from CDOT.
CDOT has no money. Build grant. You can always apply for a build grant.
Okay, any other comments? Okay. Thank you. Mr. Devon, you've got...
Yes, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council. I just want to make sure we walk away from this meeting understanding direction that the city council may give staff here. We're understanding, based on your comments, that you would want us to go forward and prepare an action right now scheduled for the August 20th council meeting to actually develop ballot language and a resolution that would authorize the placement of this measure on the November ballot. Am I correct in assuming that?
So let me just make sure we're completely clear. Let me ask the council, everybody okay with that?
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So it looks like, yes, that you are correct. that's our direction to you tonight.
Okay, so we will proceed along those lines. The other thing that I would want to mention to you is that as we move forward for the next few weeks, we are going to start talking more and more and more to people in the community about this debt authorization election and what is the projects and so forth. Some of that dialogue actually began on Friday with the mayor making a presentation to the Arvada Chamber. We will, Lori Gillis will be attending the Transportation Advisory Committee meeting on Wednesday night. And if any member of the council would like to attend with Lori, she'd be happy to have you to talk to the Transportation Advisory Committee. We also want to call together the Citizens CIP Committee from the last couple of committees that were formed because we need to start discussing the support for this measure and support for the campaign and the election that would move forward during the fall. And we would hope the City Council will be enthusiastic supporters of this measure. I believe we've been talking about that and helping to raise money and to take the other steps necessary in order to ensure a successful outcome in November. So I just wanted to pass that along too, that this is the beginning of the work that we're doing, and there's much more work to come. And of course, after August 20th, assuming you do authorize the placement on the ballot, then at that point, there can be no more public money spent on any of the activities that we would be undertaking moving forward from there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's good advice. And I would like to attend the Transportation Committee meeting on Wednesday night. So if you'll get me the info, I'll be happy to attend. Mr. Pfeiffer, you wanted to?
Yeah, and just so you know, on that night, I think John and I are at ADCOG, sub-region, Dr. Cog, so we won't be, you're talking about the Arvada Transportation Advisory Committee, right?
Yes. Are you talking about John Ferruzzi?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think we're
Right.
both going to be somewhere else, so
Right.
if another council member would go, that would probably be great.
I'll be happy to go.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So that concludes that item. Next up, we have staff updates. Do we have anything else for us tonight?
Nothing else.
Okay. Mr. Daly, anything for us? Okay. Anything from any other members of council? Okay. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you all.